In our previous video, we explored Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, where we witnessed how one man's unwavering determination held a fractured nation together through its bloodiest conflict, making decisions that would forever alter the course of American history and preserve the Union against overwhelming odds. In this video, we continue the story by showing Abraham Lincoln's final days, the assassination that shocked America. The topic of this video is Abraham Lincoln's final days, the assassination that shocked America. And here on History Unlocked, we bring you the untold stories and pivotal moments that shaped our world. So make sure to subscribe and press the bell icon so you never miss a journey through history's most compelling chapters. The spring air over Washington carried a sense of cautious optimism as the war that had torn the nation apart for 4 agonizing years finally approached its conclusion. And Abraham Lincoln, the weathered president who had guided the Union through its darkest hour, stood at the threshold of what he hoped would be a new era of peace and reconciliation. General Robert E. Lee had surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, effectively ending organized Confederate resistance and bringing the long nightmare of Civil War to a close. And Lincoln's face, deeply lined and aged far beyond his years by the crushing weight of responsibility and grief, showed rare moments of relief as he contemplated the monumental task ahead of rebuilding a shattered South and ensuring that the 4 million newly emancipated African Americans would find their place as free citizens in a transformed nation. His vision for this reconstruction was characteristically generous and forward-thinking, rooted in his belief that binding the nation's wounds required compassion rather than vengeance, a position that put him at odds with more radical members of his own party who demanded harsh punishment for the Southern Rebellion. On the evening of April 11th, Lincoln delivered what would be his final public address from a White House window to a crowd gathered on the lawn below. And in that speech, he outlined his approach to Reconstruction and, for the first time, publicly endorsed limited black suffrage, specifically suggesting that voting rights be extended to African American men who were educated or who had served in the Union military. Among the crowd listening that night stood John Wilkes Booth, a celebrated stage actor whose family name was synonymous with theatrical excellence in America, but whose mind had become consumed with Confederate sympathies and a virulent hatred of Abraham Lincoln that bordered on obsession. Booth, handsome and charismatic with dark curling hair and a magnetic stage presence that had won him fame and fortune, had spent the war years performing in Northern theaters while secretly working as a Confederate spy. And as he listened to Lincoln speak of black suffrage, he turned to his companion and muttered words that revealed his murderous intent, declaring that this would be the last speech Lincoln would ever make. From that moment, his earlier plan to kidnap the president transformed into something far more sinister. A conspiracy to assassinate not just Lincoln but the entire leadership of the United States government in a single coordinated strike that would throw the nation into chaos. Booth gathered around him a group of Confederate sympathizers including Lewis Powell, a former Confederate soldier with a violent temperament, George Atzerodt, a German immigrant and carriage maker, and David Harold, a young pharmacy clerk who could navigate the Maryland countryside. And together they plotted their audacious attack with Booth assigned to kill Lincoln, Powell to assassinate Secretary of State William Seward, and Atzerodt to murder Vice President Andrew Johnson. On the morning of Good Friday, April 14th, Lincoln awoke in a surprisingly cheerful mood, telling his wife Mary and members of his cabinet about a recurring dream he had experienced the night before, a dream in which he was aboard a mysterious ship moving rapidly toward a distant shore, a dream that he said always preceded significant events. The president conducted his usual business that day, meeting with his cabinet to discuss Reconstruction policy and greeting visitors, but he also made time for a carriage ride with Mary during which they spoke of their future after his presidency. And for a brief moment, the burdens of war seemed to lift from his shoulders. That evening, despite concerns about his safety, Lincoln decided to attend a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater, a popular comedy that promised light entertainment, and Mary invited Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée Clara Harris to join them in the presidential box. John Parker, the Washington police officer assigned to guard the president that night, was a man with a troubling record of dereliction of duty, yet he remained assigned to presidential protection through bureaucratic inertia. And as the Lincolns arrived at the theater fashionably late, the audience erupted in applause and Lincoln smiled and bowed before settling into his rocking chair in the flag-draped box. Parker took his position outside the presidential box, but as the play progressed and his boredom grew, he abandoned his post entirely, first to watch the play and then to leave the theater for a nearby tavern, leaving Abraham Lincoln completely unprotected at the moment when protection mattered most. Meanwhile, John Wilkes Booth had spent the day preparing for his assault. drinking steadily to steel his nerves and checking his weapons, a single-shot Derringer pistol and a large hunting knife. And when he learned that Lincoln would definitely be attending the performance, he met one final time with his co-conspirators to synchronize their attacks for approximately 10:15 that evening. Booth entered Ford's Theater through the front entrance, and the staff, recognizing the famous actor who had performed on that stage many times, allowed him to move freely throughout the building without question, and he made his way to the dress circle level, barricading the outer door with a wooden plank he had hidden earlier, then moved silently to the door of the box itself. Inside the box, Abraham Lincoln sat in his rocking chair with Mary beside him holding his hand while Major Rathbone and Clara Harris occupied the other seats, all four watching the play unfold below and enjoying a rare evening of normalcy. On stage, the play reached its third act, and as the theater erupted in laughter at a comedic line, John Wilkes Booth opened the door to the presidential box, stepped inside, raised his Derringer pistol, and at a distance of less than 5 feet, fired a single lead ball directly into the back of Abraham Lincoln's skull, just behind the left ear, the bullet traveling through his brain and lodging behind his right eye. The president's head dropped forward, his body went limp in the rocking chair, and Mary Todd Lincoln watched in horror as her husband slumped unconscious with blood beginning to flow from the wound. Major Rathbone lunged at Booth, attempting to grab him, but Booth slashed at Rathbone with his hunting knife, opening a deep gash in the major's arm that sent blood spraying across the box. Then Booth climbed onto the railing and prepared to leap 12 feet down to the stage below, but as he jumped, his spur caught in the Treasury Guard flag draped across the front of the box, throwing off his balance and causing him to land awkwardly on the stage, fracturing the bone in his left leg. Despite the pain, Booth rose to his feet, turned to face the stunned audience, brandished his bloody knife above his head, and shouted the Virginia state motto, "Sic semper tyrannis," meaning thus always to tyrants, before limping rapidly across the stage toward the back exit while Mary Lincoln's piercing screams filled the theater. Booth disappeared through the back door where he had a horse waiting, and despite his broken leg, he managed to mount and ride away into the darkness, heading for the Navy Yard Bridge and into the Maryland countryside. Back in the presidential box, several doctors who had been in the audience rushed to Lincoln's aid, including Charles Leal, a young Army surgeon who took charge of the situation, immediately examining Lincoln and discovering the entry wound, and he removed a blood clot that had formed over the wound, which briefly allowed the president to breathe more regularly, though Leal knew instantly that the wound was mortal. The doctors determined that moving Lincoln back to the White House would likely kill him immediately, so they carried his long body across the street to the Peterson House, a narrow brick building where they placed him diagonally across a bed that was too short for his frame. Throughout the night, government officials, military leaders, and physicians crowded into the small Peterson house while Mary Todd Lincoln sat nearby, periodically rushing to her husband's bedside and collapsing in anguished tears, and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton set up a makeshift command center, taking witness statements and issuing orders for the pursuit of Booth and his accomplices. Across Washington that same night, Lewis Powell gained entrance to Secretary Seward's home by claiming to have medicine, and when Seward's son blocked his path, Powell beat him savagely, then burst into Seward's bedroom and attacked him with a knife, stabbing repeatedly at his head and neck. But the metal neck brace Seward wore from a recent carriage accident deflected several blows that would have been fatal, and though Seward suffered severe lacerations, he survived. George Atzerodt, assigned to kill Vice President Johnson, spent the evening drinking and ultimately lost his nerve entirely, never making any attempt on Johnson's life before fleeing the city. As dawn broke over Washington on the morning of April 15th, Abraham Lincoln still clung to life, though his breathing had become increasingly irregular and shallow, and Mary Lincoln was brought to his bedside one final time where she collapsed across his body, sobbing and calling his name, but there was no response. At 22 minutes past 7 in the morning, Abraham Lincoln drew his last breath, and after a moment of profound silence, Secretary Stanton, tears streaming down his face, spoke the words that would echo through history, "Now he belongs to the ages." The news spread through Washington within minutes and across the nation within hours, and the celebration that had filled northern cities following Lee's surrender transformed instantly into profound grief, shock, and rage as millions of Americans felt they had lost a father who had guided them through the Republic's greatest crisis. Meanwhile, John Wilkes Booth, his leg broken and in excruciating pain, had met up with David Harold in the Maryland countryside, and together they sought help from Confederate sympathizers, including Dr. Samuel Mudd, who set Booth's broken leg, and for 12 days, the largest manhunt in American history pursued them through Maryland and into Virginia. On the morning of April 26, Union cavalry finally tracked Booth and Harold to the Garrett farm near Port Royal, Virginia, where they had been sleeping in a tobacco barn, and the soldiers surrounded the structure and called for the fugitives to surrender. Harold gave himself up immediately, but Booth refused, calling out that he would never be taken alive, and the commanding officer ordered the barn set on fire, and as flames consumed the structure, Sergeant Boston Corbett fired his revolver through a gap in the barn wall, hitting Booth in the neck and severing his spinal cord. Soldiers dragged the paralyzed assassin from the burning barn, and he lay on the porch, unable to move, whispering to the soldiers to tell his mother that he died for his country. And as the sun rose, John Wilkes Booth died. Booth's body was returned to Washington and buried secretly to prevent his grave from becoming a shrine, while the co-conspirators faced swift military justice, and Lewis Powell, David Harold, George Atzerodt, and Mary Surratt were tried by a military commission and found guilty, and they were hanged at the Arsenal Penitentiary, with Surratt becoming the first woman executed by the federal government. Abraham Lincoln's body began a long journey home to Springfield, traveling by funeral train along a route that reversed the journey he had taken to Washington for his inauguration, and at every stop, hundreds of thousands of Americans lined the tracks and gathered to pay their respects, with Lincoln's casket placed on public display in major cities where thousands filed past to view his remains. The national mourning was unprecedented in American history, with elaborate funeral processions and expressions of grief that transcended regional and political boundaries. And the assassination's timing proved catastrophic for Reconstruction because Lincoln's successor, Andrew Johnson, lacked Lincoln's political skill and moral vision. And under Johnson's leadership, Reconstruction became a bitter struggle that largely abandoned the promises made to African Americans. Abraham Lincoln's assassination transformed him in the American imagination from a controversial wartime president into a martyred savior, and his reputation grew steadily until he became one of the two most revered figures in American history. And the legacy he created of preserving democratic government and expanding freedom continues to inspire Americans to live up to the highest ideals of their republic. And if this journey through one of history's most tragic moments has moved you, remember to subscribe to History Unlocked, press the bell icon, and like this video so we can continue bringing you the stories that shaped our world.